Good afternoon, everybody. It's David Perlmutter from Quantum Listing, and thank you for joining us today for our webinar, Top 5 Hot Topics in Commercial Real Estate with Liz Berthelette. Did I pronounce your last name right, Liz? I should have asked you before.
You did. You got it right.
Yes. All right. So thank you, Liz, for volunteering your time today. I know that Julia, who is our customer success advocate here at Quantum Listing, had coffee with you recently, and you were kind enough to invite her to meet. I think you guys met on CRE chat with Melissa Alexander and Casey Flannery. Is that right?
Yes, yeah. We did. And come to find out, we're both in the Boston market, so we decided to meet in real life.
That's excellent. It really is.
Yeah, and I think Casey was going to try to join us, and she just emailed me saying she has to miss it, but she'll get the replay recording just like everyone else will. And we were pretty excited to tell them that we met in person because for those of you who aren't familiar with CRE chat, the premise of CRE chat was to broaden the scope of networking so that you can network with people on Twitter throughout the country, not just in your market. So it was pretty funny that we did like the reverse of that by meeting in person a few weeks ago. But it worked out great. And now Liz is here on a Quantum Listing webinar. So all we could ask for.
All right. Excellent. So Julia, I am going to throw it over to you now to introduce Liz and
for sure
take it from there. Thanks.
Okay. If you don't mind going to the next slide. So Liz will be talking to us today. As you guys saw, the topic was the five hot topics in commercial real estate. And, Liz had a lot of different things she could talk to us. She's quite the expert in our industry. But I follow Liz on Twitter. And if you don't yet, you should. We'll give you her Twitter handle at the end of the webinar. But Liz does a lot of research. She's always at the top of the news. And she told me when we met with each other that she, spends at least an hour every day reading through everything that's in the news so that she's, at the totally knowledgeable before everyone else knows everything. And she does a really good job of dissecting the news and bringing it to you in a very easy to understand fashion. I really enjoyed some of the infographics, which I think she included a couple of them in the slides that will follow. But so we decided to pick 5 topics that are hot in the industry. So Liz chose to talk about urban versus suburban, kind of what's been happening in those markets. She also chose office and industrial. Construction hit cyclical peaks. And then co-working, we're very excited to hear her talk about that. We have not had anyone talk about co-working to my knowledge yet on the webinar, so we're very excited. The science of clustering, and then the cost of last mile logistics. And we also are going to leave time at the end if anybody has any questions. But with that being said, if at any point during the webinar, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to type in the chat box. And once we have a minute, we will get your question answered, and you can even unmute yourself. So if you don't mind going to the next slide, we love to. So we told you a little bit about Liz, but there's lots to tell. So Liz, she is a seasoned commercial real estate researcher and economist, and she has 13 years of experience. She just recently actually got awarded the 2018 Power Woman Award by BizNow Boston. And she also provides a lot of insights in local newspapers as well as national. I believe she's appeared in the Wall Street Journal. And she also authors Newmark, Knight, and Frank's quarterly market reports, as well as white papers. She does lots of blog posts, guest columns on relevant trends and happenings in the commercial real estate market. I know we'll be very fortunate if Liz volunteers to do a blog post for our weekly blog. That would be great. But we'll start with the webinar. So Liz, besides being a maps, graphs, and data junkie, Liz says she enjoys pineapple on pizza, which if anyone disagrees with that, they can type in the chat box. She's also very into British crime dramas and 90s hip hop. And that is, quite the array. I wouldn't expect someone who's into British crime dramas to also like 90s hip hop, but teach their own. And so Liz has degrees in economics, geography, and global studies from Assumption College. So with all of those vast range of topics, it's not a surprise that she's an avid lifelong learner. So with that being said, I'm going to toss it over to Liz because you guys don't need to hear me talk anymore, and it is Liz's turn. But first, I did want to include this little excerpt from the Boston Power Woman questions with Liz. She was interviewed and she won this award. And then as you can see here, I like this first little paragraph where it says that it's difficult to find anyone who knows Boston or knows where the city's real estate cycle is going better than Liz. And this was before she switched jobs, but even last year, she was still knew Boston better than anyone else. So now we can turn it to Liz.
Thank you. Yeah, if you want to move to the next slide, we can get into the content. I do want to thank, David and Julia and Quantum Listings for having me on the webinar today. I'm very excited to talk about my some of the top trends that I'm seeing in the marketplace. And yeah, don't get mad at me because I like pineapple on pizza. So with that, why don't we take a look at sort of the urban versus suburban narrative. So in a lot of major tech hubs, particularly in the Northeast, the urban office environment has dominated the conversation in recent years. Boston is no exception. We see a lot of companies moving to the city to attract and retain talent, and we've just seen a lot of activity in the office market downtown this cycle. But once you sort of move outside of this local bubble, however, I think the narrative changes a little bit. And this slide was prompted by a BizNow article that I read a few weeks ago, talking about how at a macro level, the suburban office markets are sort of booming. There's many other markets in the South and the West that are large in area. They have big swaths of developable land, and it just makes more sense, more sense to have commercial activity in different areas besides downtown. And there are premier suburban office submarkets in places like Dallas, Houston, Phoenix, Salt Lake City that have seen some pretty significant growth over the last couple of years, and a lot of it has been due to tech as well. So we've definitely seen that happen. And looking at specific data from Newmark, we can see that the delta between suburban and urban vacancies was much wider 10 years ago. Clearly vacancy compression has been more pronounced in the suburbs based on information that our national team is tracking. So again, we can see that the suburbs have also dominated office deliveries, and I would say, again, locally in Boston, that's not what's happening, but nationwide, over the past 10 years, we saw 72% of office construction occur in the suburbs. The rent growth story, in the last 5 years, suburban office markets have, seen higher rent growth than the urban markets. And, investment activity has been a little bit more even, but suburban sales volume in dollars has, accounted for 56% of total volume from 2009 to 2019. So I think it's a really interesting story. When you're looking at your own market, as I said, Boston has very specific trends occurring. There are markets out there that are not acting the same way that Boston is. So I found that to be very interesting. And then there's this whole conversation about millennials and how eventually, once they get old enough and have families and want to buy a house, they'll be moving out to the suburbs. So we could see more activity in those markets in the coming years. So if we move on to slide 2, I want to talk about development, construction. So in both the office and industrial markets, we're seeing the construction pipeline climb pretty significantly. I was in the third quarter, we've reached cyclical highs for both property types. So we have almost 100 million square feet of office product underway, And in the industrial market, we sort of shot up to over 300 million square feet of industrial product underway. So talking about the warehouse market, distribution, groundbreakings continue to increase nationwide because we have a lot of demand from warehouse users, retailers, e-commerce, Amazon, you name it. And the activity is concentrated mainly in major distribution hubs. So that's Inland Empire, Dallas, Atlanta, Houston. E-commerce has definitely changed the game for industrial, and that's why we've continued to see a ramping up of construction in that asset class. And in the office market, you know, we're seeing tenants continue to gravitate towards new, efficient, high-quality office space. There are several markets where there is a lot of office product underway. You know, sort of looking at it as a percentage of current inventory. You know, Silicon Valley, Salt Lake City, Seattle, Nashville, Atlanta, they're seeing a pretty significant amount of construction in those markets. There is maybe some concern that we're overbuilding this late in the cycle, but, you know, if you look at a market like Boston, our pipeline is still growing, and yet development is relatively in check compared to, you know, historical trends. I mean, currently, you know, we have 5 or 6 million square feet underway metro-wide, and that's only, you know, 1.5–2% of current office inventory. In some of those other markets I mentioned, it's 4% or higher of current office inventory. So, you know, it all depends on the market, but I thought this was really interesting that we're seeing construction in both asset classes hit that cyclical high in the third quarter. So moving on to our third slide, you know, we really can't talk about commercial real estate without talking about co-working. It's top of mind for almost every industry expert. It's really sort of impacted the office market and how, you know, deals are done and companies think about space usage and all of that. And I think it's safe to say that flexible office space is here to stay. But, you know, what it will look like in the future, how much will there be, in what form, I think that remains to be seen. We don't know what exactly is going to happen in the future, but there's you know, there's still demand for this product offering, and even despite what's happened with WeWork and their, you know, stalled IPO, and they're the largest co-working operator in the world. So I think even with, you know, them faltering recently, there's still a need for this product. And just to put some stats out there, since 2010, flexible space has increased 26% per year nationwide. WeWork has definitely dominated that activity. I would say on a percentage basis, you know, San Francisco, Manhattan, LA, they sort of top the list of markets with the most co-working space. And obviously fallout from WeWork, you know, what will eventually happen, it just hasn't been realized yet. It is a little concerning that they are the largest office user in a handful of markets like New York, largest office tenant. So there could be some negative repercussions once, you know, all of the fallout shakes out. Once we see the layoffs, once we start to see, you know, the cost-cutting measures that they will inevitably implement, it could cause some locations to go dark, and that could be problematic for certain markets. We're already starting to see deals sort of stall out. You know, landlords are getting a little bit that, you know, they don't want to deal with WeWork, or WeWork's not ready to push through on some deals. So we see some deals stall out. Competitors are starting to step in. I know here in Boston, Notel is opening up locations here. WorkBar continues to expand. So we are seeing competitors expand. And in some cases, I think we've heard of landlords, you know, reaching out to some of these competitors to try to, you know, have a plan B if WeWork were to go out of their building. This is a trend that we will continue to monitor really closely, given the potential impact on the office market. So slide 4, you know, here in Boston, we're a life science heavy, we're one of the main clusters for life science and biotech activity, pharmaceuticals, R&D, all that kind of stuff. And I would say that this product type is having its day. It's gone from a niche asset class to highly sought after core product where institutional investors who haven't normally invested in commercial lab product has started to move into that arena. So established biotech hubs, Boston, San Francisco, they continue to expand exponentially, but we're starting to see other clusters sort of emerge throughout the US. So markets with teaching hospitals or top universities, Philadelphia, New York, they're gaining momentum because they have access to talent. And there's other growing biotech hubs that are, smaller but important. Seattle, Denver, Raleigh, Durham, also have access to young top universities, talent pools, all of that kind of stuff. And those markets sort of offer a discount when you look at commercial rents for lab space in Boston and San Francisco. So as I mentioned, access to labor remains a crucial component for demand growth in the life science industry and for commercial, real estate demand. Overall, the life science industry now encompasses 2.1 million jobs in the U.S. And if we drill down further, looking at this map here on the screen, this is sort of looking at concentrations of biopharma employment, which is sort of like biotech R&D and pharmaceutical production and those types of industries. And we can see there's high concentrations of this employment sector in a lot of major markets. But one area that stuck out to me when I created this map was sort of this Boston-Washington corridor, where, it's just this large contiguous stretch of highly concentrated numbers of people working in that industry. And with access to labor, such a key issue, it's not surprising that life science companies, developers, investors are especially active along this corridor. So I thought that trend was super, super interesting when I managed to put this map together. And finally, I want to talk about last mile logistics. I will say this has sort of been, moving on to slide 5, this topic has been at the forefront of the industrial narrative for a few years now. Increasing urbanism, especially in markets like Boston and New York, that has impacted industrial assets sort of in two distinct ways. So first, older industrial assets located near transit hubs or city centers have been ripe for redevelopment. So you have a lot of young people, or a lot of people in general, moving to the city, wanting to be in the city. That's where the jobs are, and where the jobs are going. And developers are continuously replacing some of these properties as, to a higher and better use, where it's multifamily, it's retail, it's mixed use with commercial and multifamily and hotel and entertainment and all of that. And it's definitely a trend we're seeing in Boston. And then secondly, e-commerce and other users needing proximity to large population centers are also looking to occupy these assets. So, you have your population growing and they need stuff. They need plumbers, they need, their groceries, they need all these things delivered. You have users also wanting to be close to the population center. So there's two sort of conflicting demands on these infill industrial properties. So as a result, pricing, both lease rates and sale prices, have increased rapidly for urban industrial assets, and owners and users are paying more to operate near densely populated city centers. So in markets like Seattle, New York, Boston, San Francisco, just to give you some context on where warehouse distribution rents are, they can range anywhere from, the low teens per square foot, triple net, to, the mid 20s per square foot triple net, in some of the more expensive submarkets. But with higher operating costs, we're starting to see that sort of cut into the bottom line. And I don't know if anyone else read this article about Amazon, but it was sort of talking about how there was a decline in profits for Amazon during the third quarter. And a lot of that had to do with their big push to get 1 hour delivery in as many markets as they could. So needing that last mile warehouse is, costing them some money, whether it's rent, whether it's hiring more people, whether it's costing them more to purchase their properties, but it's starting to, affect sort of the operating costs to deliver things faster to their customers. And, if a e-commerce giant like Amazon is struggling, it's not hard to imagine other operators are facing the same costs. So, looking forward, I think consumers continue to demand fasting shipping times, and they're going to want their, products faster, quicker. They want more variety, all of those kinds of things, and that's going to continue to boost last mile logistics. There's talk of alternative solutions to this outsized demand being multi-story urban warehouse, which we tend to see in Europe and Asia. I don't think we're quite seeing it here yet across a lot of markets, but whatever the solution is, the cost will likely continue to rise for urban industrial assets. And with that, that's, all my planned commentary. So if anyone has any questions, please fire away.
Yeah, feel free to unmute yourself, or if you don't want to do that or you don't have audio, you're more than welcome to type in the chat box. I will start us off. One of my questions is, if you had done a sixth topic for today, what would that have been, you think?
Oh, a sixth topic. Well, we, Julia, we sort of briefly talked about retail and sort of what's going on with malls. I think the retail landscape and everything that's changing there is super, super interesting. I know up here in Massachusetts, we've had several underperforming malls close. And I will say they weren't high end and they weren't in, huge population centers. So either they were anchored by Sears or JCPenney's or one of those types of big box users. And it's just, there's not as much need for that product type. So that I think is interesting, and it'll be interesting to see what, landlords do with the properties, or what ends up happening with them. Do they get torn down? Do they get, redone? I think there's a mall somewhere in Massachusetts where they've added a Target, and maybe they're adding, multifamily. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in the retail arena. That probably would have been my sixth hot topic.
Okay, good to know. Anybody else?
Oh, can I? Okay.
Yeah.
Hi Liz, it's David. So I had a few questions. First, my office is in White Plains, New York, and we're seeing a lot of the older office parks being repurposed. So one of them became a Lifetime Fitness. Another one is becoming a Wegmans supermarket and housing. We're seeing others that are becoming medical instead of traditional office. Is this a phenomenon that's happening all over the country, do you think? And is it going to go too far, where there won't be enough office space in the suburbs?
So I know Boston obviously quite well, so I can talk about that. But I think generally speaking, it probably is happening in other markets. But sort of what we talked about is it might be more prevalent in the Northeast, where the urban office story is a lot more compelling, and we haven't seen sort of that, flight to value. So a lot of times the rents in urban markets get very high. A lot of tenants sometimes move out to the suburbs. We just haven't seen that this cycle. I would say that, here in Boston, there's some, functionally obsolete office stuff that has been converted to self-storage. We're seeing a lot of lab conversions, especially in markets that are kind of close-ish to Cambridge. So, Waltham and Watertown and Bedford. So, that's been happening where, we're seeing a lot of demand for life science real estate, and there's just no space in Cambridge. So landlords that have a vacant office building, if they can, they'll convert it to lab, and it's been sort of successful. Definitely successful in some of those markets that I mentioned. We've also seen office space move to multifamily or just get torn down. I think, a lot of the suburban, 80s office park type product just isn't what modern young workers want at the moment. So, I think there's still some more of that redevelopment trend to play out. And until we start to see, pretty significant movement back to the suburbs, at least in Boston, I think you'll see more of that playing out. But like I said, there's, Houston and Dallas and some of those other markets, they have big companies like Exxon and Liberty Mutual building huge suburban campuses. But again, in Texas, if a building's 10 years old, it's used, and people, companies don't usually want it. They want something new and shiny. So I don't know if that answers your question, but we're definitely seeing it in Boston, and I don't think that trend will go away anytime soon.
Interesting. Another question: you said that there's a lot of the suburban office development is really outpacing the urban office development, and are you seeing that in the sort of the suburban downtowns, the suburban urban cities, or is it along the highways? Where is most of that happening?
Yeah, I would say it's probably the former, where it's, the suburban urban, or, just outside of the city center. I want to say when I talked to our Denver research director that they sort of had to kind of redraw their CBD because there was a market where there was a lot of activity that was just outside the CBD, and it started to move that way. And they, kind of made it so that it made sense to redraw what they considered to be the CBD. So I think that's sort of the first stop, is kind of those suburban urban. But like I said, there are markets, Tampa comes to mind, where their top office market isn't downtown, or San Antonio is a good example. Like, the downtown in San Antonio is not a hub of office commerce. It's their, premier suburban office node. That's where all the activity sort of happens. So I think it sort of depends on where you are and what market you're in.
Got it. Interesting. Let's see. I had one more question I remembered that I wanted to ask, and that was when I was at ICSC in Las Vegas this past May. I ran into a guy I know, Jim Sylvia, who used to be the head of real estate at Stop and Shop, and he's now doing private consulting. And one of the companies he's consulting for, and I wish I remembered the name, but I don't, has a really interesting technology where they are, and there was just an article in the paper the other day about this, which maybe you saw, about how supermarkets and big box stores are beginning to create micro fulfillment centers within the four walls of the retail store to help solve that last mile problem and help them compete better with Amazon. Have you seen that, and do you think that will be effective?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any examples off the top of my head other than Amazon and Whole Foods. I know, the Whole Foods in my town, you can order your stuff on Amazon and pick it up there. I think that's a creative solution for sort of the last mile problem, given that, what's happening with these sort of industrial assets that are infill. I think you could definitely see it happening more often, because it's an opportunity to to sort of reach more people. And even, if it's instead of shipping it to your house, if it's kind of like a pickup thing, you get more customers into your store. So there's sort of a twofold to that trend. I definitely think it makes sense. One trend that I had heard about a little while ago was sort of that retailers, they're carrying less stock now. So that's even sort of impacting, supply chain and all of that stuff, where instead of carrying 10 of one item, they'll carry 2, and they have to restock their inventory faster. So for them to also act as a fulfillment center, or if it's a store nearby that acts as a fulfillment center, that kind of makes a lot of sense. Oh, and then another example, out in Worcester, there was a Sam's Club that Walmart, they decided to shut it down and turn that into a fulfillment center. So we've seen that happen as well, which sort of made sense because there's a super Walmart not far from that particular Sam's Club. So maybe they didn't need both. But we've seen that happen where, it kind of makes sense in terms of the supply chain and access to people and population for that to happen.
Interesting. Do you think that Amazon, I know they bought Whole Foods, to help in part, I think, with that last mile problem. But do you think that they'll buy other failing chains and not even bother to have real retail in there, but just as fulfillment, just because they're where they're located relative to the population?
I mean, they could. I know, Amazon's been collecting a lot of data about a lot of locations with their HQ2 RFP that came out a couple of years ago. And, they kind of know what they're doing. I mean, I think if you've got well-located retailers that aren't doing well, could Amazon come in and kind of just say, yeah, we're going to use this as a micro fulfillment center? Sure. Stranger things have happened.
I see that Julia has written a question from Andres from our team, which says, with the advancement in technology and cloud-based platforms, grants people more flexibility as to where they work, will that affect the traditional office market alongside shared workspace?
Yeah, I mean, we're already seeing that in Boston. We're definitely seeing that where there's a lot of companies that are decreasing their square feet per worker and allowing their employees to work from home a few days a week and then come into the office, but they don't have a designated space. They call it hoteling, where you kind of sign up in the morning, you have a locker, you get your stuff out of your locker, and you go to your assigned seat for the day. It's not widespread, but we're definitely seeing companies doing that. I think it allows, more flexibility, and companies can kind of lower their overhead by needing less overall square feet or putting more people into the same space. So I think that will continue to play out, and we're seeing a lot of the tech companies, they just don't need as much space, and we're also seeing law firms and finance firms sort of right sizing. You don't need an entire huge law library anymore. Everything's in the cloud, everything's online. So how companies and how people are using their space are definitely changing, and flexible office space and co-working, I think, is just one component of that.
And going back to housing and the impact on the office market, one of the real challenges in San Francisco, in New York City, and I'm sure in some of the other major metropolitan areas, is that housing has gotten so incredibly expensive. So somebody who's at the beginning of their career, can find it very difficult to find a place that they can afford to live. So, like in New York City, 4 or 5 buddies from high school or college are, finding a place to live together, and in Long Island City or Brooklyn. Is the housing, affordable housing, is that going to end up driving people out of cities?
I think what it does is it drives people to different cities. Obviously, I think if you're talking about home ownership, and you're at a certain age, I'm just thinking more in terms of Boston or New York or some of those really expensive East Coast cities. You might have to move pretty far out to afford to buy. And I think towns and suburban locations along transit routes, they end up being the most popular because it's an easy commute back to the city, or relatively, as long as the trains run on time. But I think what ends up happening is places like Austin and Salt Lake City and Nashville, which, Amazon's opening up a call center there, and Charlotte, they end up getting younger people moving there. And in some instances, companies are, relocating there. And I know Boston's lost out on a couple of companies to, cities like Austin recently, just because they can offer much more affordable commercial rents, as well as more affordable housing for their employees. So I think that's what happens. And I mean, I can't speak for any other markets, although I do know the Boston data. Most recently, in terms of net migration, Boston actually had negative net domestic migration. So, U.S. residents that have actually been moving out of the city, but our total but international in-migration, so immigration, actually brought the number into positive. So that's sort of what's been keeping our migration numbers up here in Boston, where I think, if you work in tech and you can't afford $4,000 a month for an apartment, Austin sounds like a really good deal, and there's no snow.
Yeah. Interesting. Anybody else have some questions for Liz? Because she's very good on her feet. I think she can handle just about anything you throw at her. Let's see. I wrote down my questions. Did I get to all of them?
Which mall, Paul, is opening up the recreational health club inside? You can type in the chat box if you don't want to unmute yourself.
Yeah. Oh.
You said you're in Hudson Valley. Do you know that mall, David? Hudson Valley?
Well, it's in the Hudson Valley. I know the Galleria in which gallery? Not the White Plains Gallery, is it? That one.
Hudson.
Middletown. Oh yeah. Of course. Yes, I do know that mall, and yeah, that is Middletown has always perplexed me a little bit because it's in the middle of I guess it's Orange County, like its name would suggest it is, but the population density is so light that it doesn't really surprise me that one was the retail there was particularly vulnerable. So that sounds like a good thing to have happened there. I had another question. I forgot what it was. All right. Anybody else have questions for Liz?
In the meantime, we can show Liz's Twitter handle because she does a great job of tweeting the news and her perspective. So it's pretty easy to remember. It's Liz_Berthelette. And Liz was also kind enough to offer her email address for you all if you want to email her, or you can even call her office. So Liz, you may have a bunch of phone calls the rest of the week. Be warned. But we really appreciate Liz being on. And like David said, if you have any questions at all, don't hesitate to reach out now, or even if you want to tweet at Liz or write her an email, go for it. And other than that, we can continue to talk unless someone else has questions. So we do have a very exciting upcoming webinar schedule. Today was great. And then next week we will do a webinar. It's going to be a quantum listing webinar that is geared towards our build out users. So those are people that are syndicating their listings from Build Out, which is a marketing platform. But this webinar it's relevant to anyone who is interested in using our platform. So don't be shied away from it because of if you don't use Build Out. And then after that, on November 20th, we will have Nir Eyal, the author of Indistractable, which is a book that helps you control your attention and choose your life. David has read it and he enjoyed it very much. And he also read Nir's best-selling book, Hooked, which taught you how to create habit-forming products, if I'm not mistaken. So David likes to say that at first they get you hooked and then they teach you how not to be distracted. And then the week after that, we will have a webinar about real estate tokenization and the future of real estate financing, which that should be very interesting. And then on December 11th, we have an double encore performance from Andrew Bermudez. He's been with us for at least 2 webinars now. And his topic is TBA. It's going to be a surprise until that week because Andrew can really talk about anything, but we've had some great webinars with him, so we're excited to have him back. And when we send out the replay tomorrow, we will give you the link to the webinar schedule if you want to sign up for any other upcoming webinars. And we will also include today's replay along with the slide deck and Liz's contact info for all of you guys. So I think other than that, I think we have one more slide, which is if you want to reach out to us. So this is our contact info. We have an How It Works section at the top of our website on every single page. Near there, you can also schedule a demo at any time. We have 15-minute demos, 30 minutes to an hour. And also on every page, there is an intercom where you can type in any questions you have and someone from our team will get back to you as soon as they can. If you want to email us, we have support@quantumlisting.com, or you can call, I believe that's David's office number, which is 914-470-5719. You can also call me, which I will give to you, is 508-561-0731. So, or feel free to email David or I, or myself, which is both David at quantumlisting.com and Julia at quantumlisting.com. So I think that is all. Do you want to pause the recording, David?
I want to say thank you to Liz because this was wonderful. And I want to say thank you to you, Julia, and Andres for helping put this together today. And I want to know, Julia, who are you going to have coffee with next? Who we can have on a webinar?
It's a surprise. It's a surprise. You won't know until the webinar.
Yeah.
Thank you guys for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on.
Great.
We look forward to maybe doing another one in the future. So
absolutely, real estate is always changing, and it's always good to have an expert to help sort things out for us. So
yeah, what I want to know is Liz, how do you balance like keeping up with the news and then like analyzing it and then also doing like your other work?
Yeah, so when I started in the industry, I worked for a company called Property and Portfolio Industry, and we had to, you had to be on your game. You had to know everything that was going on in the markets that you were covering. It was just something that we, needed to be experts on. So, talking about reading the news, that's sort of where I picked up that habit. But it's also about having a good team and, surrounding yourself with the right people and, working with the best. So that's another thing.
And I think when I met with you, you said that you normally, you tend to read the news on your commute in on the train. Is that correct?
Yeah, if I'm not taking a nap, but yes, I try to take that hour on the train to, go through my emails and see all the latest news in the morning and just get caught up for the day and use that time to be efficient.
So what would you do to drive? I don't know if you
sorry?
guys heard me. I got a phone call. Sorry about that. If you had to drive in, what would you do? Would you have to find a different time?
Well, I think a lot of people now listen to podcasts.
True.
So I think that would be probably a good use of my time if I did have to drive in. But
right.
you know, it's Boston traffic, so I probably wouldn't drive in.
Yeah, I avoid that at all costs. That's for sure.
We do have a link on our website in the CRE news section to our sister site, CRE Podcasts. So if you're looking for good podcasts, make sure you head over to Quantum Listing and look for that CRE news link and then the sub link for CRE Podcasts.
Yeah.
And we have probably 75 or 80 at least commercial real estate related podcasts and video channels that you can find there that cover any number of topics. All right, one last question, then we'll let you go, Liz. Where do you get the best pineapple pizza in the Boston area?
Oh man, that is a good question. Well, I would say the best pizza in Boston is probably the North End, but I don't know if they put pineapple on that kind of pizza.
I haven't seen it.
Yeah. So, I mean, you know, I would say the North End has the best pizza. That's where I would go.
What about
I may
Regina?
not get my pineapple, but that's where I would be.
What about Regina Pizza?
Yeah, they probably do it. Yeah, Regina,
I could see them doing it. Yeah. I think, Liz, you might be having to start. You might be the next commercial real estate podcast to come out. Have you considered it?
So when in a previous job, I actually did start a podcast. So you know, I've done it. I did it.
Yeah, I could see you natural, like David said. You got any questions thrown at you, and you're like on your feet. So we love it, and we again thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it, and hopefully we'll see you guys back on another Quantum Listing webinar soon.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Thanks
Thank
again.
you.